Hello and welcome to the Beyond Biotech podcast, and this is number 16. It's also the last one in September, and it's being recorded on the road. This week's sponsor of the podcast is LabForward. Many laboratories still utilize a manual approach when it comes to cold storage monitoring. If you're interested in how your laboratory can streamline this process with digital solutions, why not attend the free LabForward webinar on the 12th and the 18th of October? You'll learn what's needed for an effective cold storage monitoring program and how to bring your workflows to the next level. Register on the LabForward website at www.labforward.io/webinars. Hope to see you there. I'm Jim Cornell from Labiotech, and if my voice sounds a little different, it's because I didn't bring my huge microphone on the road with me to Sweden for NLS days. I set off for the airport far too early, but wanted to be sure that I'd be in time. But the journey for once was amazingly smooth. I also kept another streak going. Every trip that I've been on since I left high school, I've been asked for directions, and believe me, that's a lot of trips, more than 40 countries, and you'd think in countries where I don't look native that I'd not be asked. But no, even in Dubai, Istanbul, Bangkok and Tokyo, I've been asked for directions. Anyway, the streak is still alive. It's probably not quite as impressive as Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hit streak in baseball, though. I have been a little bit concerned about the fact that people may be annoyed that I'm responsible for the week of rain that they've just had in Malmö as well, having brought it with me from Scotland. But it has been absolutely pouring at times, but there's not much you can do about that. I've definitely enjoyed my visit though, and also to Medicon Village in Lund. And I've made lots of new contacts and friends as well. There's a heavy rainfall advisory in Scotland when the plane lands tomorrow, so clearly it's following me around. So let's just move on to something a little bit brighter, and that's this week's podcast. We have 4 guests, and all 4 are CEOs. We have Olivier Soula, Deputy CEO and Director of R&D at Adocia, Mark Bagnall, CEO of Phenomix Sciences, Ulrika Norin, CEO of Omnio, and Laurence de Schoulepnikoff, CEO of Tridek-One. And of course, we have our weekly chat with Travis McCready over at JLL. And so to the news you may have missed over at Biotech.eu. And in spite of me not doing very much of it, there's still an awful lot. Everest Medicines was given the go-ahead for a renal disease drug study. Cuba is receiving 46.7 million euros to boost its biopharma sector. And Mucocourt signed a deal for its pain-relieving mouth ulcer treatment. We had an article on the need for rapid diagnostics to tackle antimicrobial resistance. Australia's Agilex Biolabs expanded its capacity with a new toxicology testing facility. And there was a commercial launch of a monkeypox PCR test for research use in laboratories worldwide. Tilt and MSD are working on an immunotherapy trial for non-small cell lung cancer, and we had an article on natural killer cells. Theon Therapeutics launched with $68 million in Series A funding for treatment of solid tumors. We had an article on the 5 hottest biotech companies in South Africa, and Scribe Therapeutics entered into an agreement with Sanofi for use of its CRISPR technologies. Ilia Pharma started its diabetic foot ulcer study. A new coalition has been launched to inject $2.5 billion into startups, including biotechs, to address food, hunger, and health. And I guess the biggest news of the week, because everyone picked up on it, including mainstream media, was the positive results from Eisai and Biogen's Alzheimer's trial. A treatment for adults with chronic skin conditions was approved by the FDA. Base Immune is making future-proof vaccines with AI, and positive results from a study of a drug to treat patients with breast cancer was published. You can read all of these and lots more at Labiotech.eu. We also published our first special edition newsletter this week on the subject of biotech and the International Day of Awareness of Food Loss and Waste. And that includes some videos, a Q&A, a couple of interviews, and 10 articles in all, so definitely worth checking those out. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues Liza, John, Omnia, and Egen for helping put that together. Right, let's get things started this week with our first guest. Swedish company Omnio has shown plasminogen is a regulator of inflammation that can be used to treat chronic wounds with dysfunctional inflammation. So what is it and what does it do and who can it help? With all the answers is Omnio's CEO Ulrika Norin.
So Omnio is a spin-out from Umeå University. It was founded by a senior professor called Tony, and he basically spent his entire research life looking into how plasminogen is working within different indications such as wound healing, periodontitis, and infection.
We're talking, I guess, today mostly about wounds and wound treatments with plasminogen. Can you tell me what the problem is with wounds?
Well, it's an enormous personal suffering for these people, leading to inability to move the way they want to. So I met a couple of patients at the Diabetic Foot Ulcer Clinic that were really frustrated by the fact that they couldn't have an active life. And besides the personal suffering, it's an enormous cost and burden on the society and the healthcare system today. So it's estimated that in US, for instance, just the treatment of the diabetic foot ulcers, not the diabetes itself, but just the ulcers, cost $13 billion yearly. It's an enormous burden on the healthcare system.
And I guess not all of them heal.
No, so it's estimated that about 1/3 of all the diabetic foot ulcers are actually considered chronic and hard to heal ulcers, meaning that they would not heal within this estimated time that wounds usually heal within.
That leads to quite a few amputations, I guess.
Yeah, and I think what is not talked about a lot is that the mortality for patients living with diabetic foot ulcers is really, really high and comparable to a lot of cancers today. So just looking at the 5-year mortality rate in diabetic foot ulcers, it's comparable to basically all cancers. So it's an enormous suffering.
It's one of those things, I think, that is worse than it sounds. I was writing an article yesterday on diabetic foot ulcers, and I looked at some of the photographs of people with diabetic foot ulcers, and they were absolutely horrific. You kind of think of a foot ulcer as being not very big and just a surface scar almost, but these were holes in the feet. It was quite horrible.
Yeah. So I have a lot of pictures of diabetic foot ulcers that I can't even show in presentations because they're so gruesome. And it's not that it's just like one tiny wound, as you say, they're very big and they've been there for quite some time also. And I've seen really terrible wounds that people, walk around with and where there is no help.
Yeah. So there are no current treatments for things like that?
There are no active treatments approved in Europe today. So what the standard of care looks like, it's mostly prevention of infections with antibiotic treatment, also debridement to remove this wounded and dead tissue, and offloading to protect the area that's affected.
So moving on to what you're doing, could you tell me what plasminogen is and how it works?
Yeah, so plasminogen is an endogenous protein, so you can see it as the body's own sort of wound healing regulator, if you want. So it's active throughout the wound healing process, so it actually helps initiate the inflammatory response that's essential to start the wound healing process. But then it also helps actually modulate the inflammation when it's not needed anymore and stop it and progress the wound into a remodeling phase and actually tissue buildup.
You were mentioning before about those gruesome images that we've seen of foot ulcers. When you treat somebody with plasminogen, is there a point at which, like for those really bad ones, is it going to help, or does it have to be early on in the wound process?
We have done some investigator-led trials. So these were wounds that where the treating physicians had tried basically everything. So the patients were asking if there were no other treatments available for them. So it was actually initiated by the patients themselves. The treating physicians knew about plasminogen and actually used plasminogen to treat these wounds. These are not controlled trials, but in those few patients, the wounds actually healed. But I want to emphasize that we've done a lot of animal studies on plasminogen's mode of action, and also seen in a variety of different species that plasminogen actually accelerates wound healing.
Excellent news for those people that are in that situation. Is it just applied topically?
So we are currently developing an injectable formulation, so where you would inject our plasminogen product around the wound to stimulate the wound healing.
And I guess recently you received some funding. What does that allow you to do?
So right now, it was a great addition to Omnio. It really strengthens both the business and also our product development. So we are currently putting in place now the manufacturing process for our recombinant plasminogen product. And we are hoping to finish that this fall and then be able to scale up the production and do our tox batch, GLP batch of our recombinant plasminogen mid next year.
What are some of the timelines as to where you're at now and when you expect this will be available to, I guess, hospitals and physicians worldwide?
Yeah, so next year we will have our manufacturing in place, and we will do our GMP batch that could be used for clinical use. And we are expecting that we will start, or we're scheduled to start our clinical trial in diabetic foot ulcer patients 2024.
That's excellent news for people. It always seems like it's so far ahead. You want it to be now so that you can make a difference. But I guess trials, regulation, authorities, it's a long process.
Yeah, and it's absolutely essential. Of course, you want to put something on the market that you know is actually effective and works the way you say it will. But it's really frustrating. I have people contacting me asking if they could get the plasminogen, treatment, but then I have to tell them that there will be an additional couple of years before they can actually try plasminogen out.
Is it something that you plan on launching globally, or will it just be in one place initially?
So we will probably market it first in the US. It has the biggest market and the biggest need right now. But of course, our plan is to launch globally.
Oh, it sounds like a great hope for people that have issues with wounds. So
yeah, it's really motivating, and it makes my work very meaningful, actually, and what makes me keep going every day. Really a great opportunity for these patients.
French biopharma company Adocia has established a first proof of concept for its Adocel implants by achieving glycemic control without insulin injections. To tell us about it is Olivier Soula, Deputy CEO and Director of R&D at Adocia.
Yeah, I'm glad to introduce you Adocia. It's an innovative company that we have co-founded with my brother and my father 17 years ago. And so the first goal of the company is to develop innovative formulations for protein and peptides. And so we could qualify the company as a drug delivery company. And our expertise is really on physical chemistry and also on in vitro, in vivo correlation to solve and to improve therapeutical strategies by improving the drug delivery of peptides and proteins. And we have been focused for many years on insulin for treating diabetes. Today, this expertise, which has connected us to the challenge of bringing a cure to type 1D by implanting cells to achieve the control of the glycemia.
And so what are the diabetes issues that you're looking to address, and what are the difficulties with that?
As you know, and it's a very challenging disease with multi-components, but let's say that all the patients, especially the patients we are qualifying as insulino-dependent, so their life depends on the daily injections of insulin, multiple daily injections, 3 to 4 to 7 sometimes, or now a lot of them are using pumps. So whatever the device to deliver the insulin, they still struggle with the fluctuation during the day of their glycemia between hyperglycemia, which has, we all know, toxic consequences, and so which is correlated to complications of diabetes like retinopathy, cardiovascular disease. So hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia can be even more severe if they are extreme, and there's a lethal risk of this hypoglycemia. These patients are always on the verge and to maintain their glycemic control. And so for that, we have developed innovative formulations of insulin to improve that. By making the insulin ultra rapid, we improve the glycemic control of the meal. And by combining a long-acting and a fast-acting, we call that the combination of BC combo, bi-chaperone combo, we can also improve the control by reducing hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia. And we have demonstrated that in clinics. And now the new generation of innovative formulation of insulin are combination of insulin plus pramlintide, which is the analog of amylin, which is an hormone co-secreted with insulin. So trying to improve the treatment by making it more physiologic. And for that, in fact, you have to introduce new components and creating a product which is more complex. And by adding, for example, pramlintide to insulin, you induce weight loss. And that is now an issue even for insulino-dependent diabetes. They become overweight, obese, because they have a real difficulty to control their appetite. So there's a lack of satiety effect. And we now know that this satiety effect is partly triggered by this amylin I was evoking. And this amylin is also synthesized, released by the same cells as insulin. So when the cells are destroyed, no insulin, no amylin. So yes, as we know now in detail this disease, and we come to propose new options for the type 1 diabetes and also type 2, who are 10% of them insulin dependent. So they have the same challenge as the type 1D to maintain their glycemic control.
What's the challenge with brittle diabetes? So
brittle diabetes is a small portion of type 1D. It's a real concern here because it's a life-threatening condition. There are very few, I would say, comparing to the population of type 1D. We estimate them as 3 out of 1,000. So approximately 75, but still there are numerous, 75,000 people throughout the world. And their life expectancy is drastically reduced compared to, I would say, regular type 1D. Life expectancy is in between 27 to 45 years old. These people have very high difficulties to control their glycemia simply with insulin injections or even insulin pumps. So they fluctuate between hyper and hypo. So not only their life expectancy is short, but their daily life is simply impossible, and they cannot work, and it's very invalidating.
Could you tell me about Adocia?
Yes, and that's why we have focused our efforts on this population, because in fact there is already one surgical procedure approved, and especially for this person, which is implantation of human cells from donors, from cadavers. But this procedure require live treatment with immunosuppressors. And as you know, immunosuppressors will affect your immune system. So then you are at risk of infection, at risk of cancer, and so this option is very difficult to be approved for young person, the majority of brittle diabetes, because the perspective of the life. What we have developed with Adocia highlights is a system to make the cells from this foreign body, the cells from donors, to make the cells furtive. So these cells, when they are encapsulated in our hydrogel, which is a three-dimensional molecular net around the cells, then the immune system from the host cannot anymore detect the cells. They are totally phantom. So that permits to remove the immunosuppressors. So you can implant the cells now without immunosuppressors, and they will achieve, like they do when they are nude, the control of the glycemia. So you understand that the innovation here is to have designed this three-dimensional molecular network to be, in the same time, transparent to the nutrients, which by chance are all small molecules, not only nutrients, but also, of course, the glucose, which is a nutrient, but of course, the insulin, which is the response that we expect from these cells. The insulin has to diffuse out of this encapsulation and to control the glycemia in the whole body of the person. So this system is permits to ensure the safety for the patient and the efficacy like its own pancreatic cells. And what is very important to see in our approach is that even if it's a cell therapy at the end, we are just developing the cell delivery system, I would say. The cell delivery system. In other words, there is a strong body of evidences of the safety of these cells from human donors themselves. And so they are approved in France for implantation. We are here to demonstrate that we bring more safety by making these cells furtive, as I said, and you can remove them at any time because the implant is an entity that can be followed, observed, and removed in case of any problem. So the strategy of the company is really a strategy of cell delivery with developing a really innovative scaffold, which has to be very friendly for the cells and totally efficient to be a barrier for the immune system.
And so what's the timeline for working on this with humans and getting towards having this approved?
Yes, so the idea is really to transfer that first to a larger animal species like pig, and we have already started our experiments, and of course to go to human. And we are confident in this transfer to large animal species and to human because, as I explained, our approach is solely physico-chemical, and so there is no biology here in the principle of in the mechanism of action of our system. So, in other words, the molecular antibodies have the same size between human and pig and rat. So we expect the system working in any species. So we plan to go in human next year.
We're going to stay in France now to take a look at Tridek-One, a biotech startup specializing in the research and development of CD31 agonists to restore immune balance. The company recently closed a €16 million financing round, and to tell us more is Laurence de Schoulepnikoff, CEO of Tridek-One.
Yeah, so the company, was founded in 2018. The research work was conducted by the two scientific founders. So Giuseppe Pina and Antonino at the interim on CD31. It was first financed by, the historical first investor is at Biopartner with Alain Hurier as managing director. And then Alain and AdBio was joined by Advent Life Science. They raised in 2019 3 million euros. And towards end of last year, beginning of this year, they decided to go for, another round of investment. And that's basically the one that was closed in July and this year, and that we announced today. So this is a 60 million round, and lead investor, for this one is Pyreus Bioventure, is a Swiss VC, and with two new investors joining is BPI France and BioCube Venture, the Belgian. From the foundation of the company until, this summer, this closing, there was a limited, let's say management team, I would say. I wasn't there. I joined 1st of July, but the decision that was taken, with this investment is to put in place, really to further build the organization. And that's why I was approached and I decided to join, and we'll be, we're currently, recruiting a CSO.
So when it comes to the actual work that you're doing, what kind of conditions are you looking to address?
Autoimmune diseases and inflammatory diseases, but mainly, we'll start with autoimmune.
And could you explain what CD31 is and the restoration of immune balance?
Yeah, so CD31 is a receptor that is part of the ETIM is the ETIM receptor family. And PD1, just PD1 is one of them, it's the most well-known one. So basically, those, they're part of this, what it's called ETIM receptors, this inhibitory motif-bearing receptors that basically balance the response of the immune system. You have one is the inflammatory response, the really inflammatory response, and the other one is the immunosuppression response, and that has to be balanced. So this is what it's the same thing. As exactly the same thing as for PD1. You're basically, if you go to in oncology, you're the antagonist of PD1, what they do is basically they tell the immune system, and you have to fight, those tumor cells. And here what we're saying is we do it the other way around, and we're saying, no, calm down, to the immune system. It's good. You don't need to overreact. The difference between, agonizing those ETIM receptors to other treatment that are immunosuppressive, it's like you do not suppress the reaction of the immune system. With some other treatments are more like immunosuppressive. Those treatments are basically, we're boosting the fact that the immune system says don't overreact. It's not that we're saying you don't react, we just say don't overreact. I'm sure, you have heard of the exit of MiroBio earlier this summer. It's basically the same type of mode of action, is agonizing those ETIM receptors. The difference with CD31 is CD31 is expressed on cells from both the innate and the adaptive immune system. And that makes it, really a unique and versatile target, across different autoimmune and inflammatory disorders. So it has a wider scope of opportunity because it's expressed more cells, different type of cells, than other ETIM receptors.
And where are you at currently with the development of CD31?
We're basically at the stage where we're doing the development of our candidates. We haven't, our lead candidates, but we have candidates that we are validating.
The announcement today was of the 16 million euros in funding. What is that going to allow you to do?
So what we'll do, with the 16 million, we will be developing our candidates. And then what we'll do, we'll do all the IND enabling studies, and we will further build the organization.
Now it's over to the US for the company Phenomix Sciences, a precision obesity biotechnology company that has launched a biobanking registry and outcomes study. With all the details is Mark Bagnall, CEO of Phenomix Sciences.
Phenomix Sciences is a early stage company. It was founded last year, 2021, based on technology that was licensed out of Mayo Clinic. The focus is obesity. In fact, more precisely, the focus is and mission is to bring precision medicine to the field of obesity. We are backed financially by the American Medical Association's innovation arm called Health 2047 and by United Healthcare, the US's largest health insurance company. We have 5 employees based mostly in Minnesota, and we intend to launch our first product early next year, which will be a blood test to identify responders to the new GLP-1 weight loss drugs like semaglutide, branded as Wegovy.
Obesity has grown in prominence and grown in scope since, well, over the last 10 years. It just seems to have become almost an epidemic, I guess. What are the current issues in tackling obesity?
That's a great question. And it's one of those things where, despite what seems to be a fairly significant amount of money invested in obesity solutions, the rate of obesity around the world is going up inexorably. In the US, the current rate amongst adults is 42% of US adults are classified as obese, so BMI is over 30. And then significant obesity, BMI is over 40, we're now approaching 10%. And the rate of childhood obesity is going up too. I think we're at 20% of adolescents and children who are classified as obese. So this rate, which is going up, expected to be half the population, there are countries around the world, the UK being one of them, Middle East also, where rates are similar to the US rates. There have been a number of different issues that have compounded this problem. One of which is interesting from a medical point of view, is that really it has not been thought of until recently as a disease. So it was only in 2013 that the AMA classified obesity as a disease. The other problem and the other issue that we're specifically addressing is variability in response to treatment. So for any one diet or drug or device or surgical technique, only about a third of patients experience significant weight loss. And we classify that as 10 to 15% total body weight loss. And so it's this variability in response that is known, it's well known. In fact, the NIH launched a program called the ADOPT program 3 years ago to study whether or not you can find biomarkers that associate with this variability in response. But so far, nobody has been able to identify why this variability exists. And so it was the technology at Mayo Clinic that actually has been produced by 2 very high profile weight loss physicians and GI docs, Dr. Michael Camilleri and Dr. Andres Acosta. It's their technology that sought to unravel this problem. And through that technology, we have a way now of identifying responders and non-responders.
Could you sort of explain a little bit about the phenotyping and the 4 types?
Yeah, so what they found, and this was after studying almost 1,000 patients in 10 clinical studies and doing what is typically done at Mayo Clinic, which is a really rigorous observational review of every patient who enters those studies. What they found was that there are fundamentally 4 subtypes or phenotypes of obesity. And these subtypes, which we've actually branded the names, hungry brain, hungry gut, emotional eating, and slow burn. So hungry brain, characterized by people who eat more than normal at a single meal. So it takes them a lot more calories to actually feel full and stop eating. Hungry gut are people who snack between meals. So You have a meal, 45 minutes later, you're feeling hungry again. Emotional eating, you're eating for reward. So if you feel bad, you go to the donut shop and have a couple of donuts. If something good happens, you go to the donut shop and have a couple of donuts because you eat as a reward. And then slow burn is those people who have low resting energy expenditure. So maybe because of muscle wasting or just not getting enough exercise. So those are the four categories. And if you know these phenotypes, you can treat patients according to phenotype, because the other piece of technology that we licensed was the ability then to go in and look at the phenotypes, understand why they're mechanistically different. And because of those mechanistic differentiations, you can then apply the right treatment. Again, whether that is a drug or device or surgery. And in fact, there's some very intriguing work being done now that also suggests that you can tailor diets, exercise routines to these phenotypes as well. So our job at Phenomix is to take all of that information and convert that into something that's scalable. It's not possible to go to Mayo Clinic and go through what they do to identify phenotypes. So just parenthetically, what Mayo Clinic does is you'll go through treadmill tests, and you'll go through body composition scans, and you get fed a radio labeled omelet, and they use nuclear imaging to watch the omelet go through your body. Well, that's just not scalable. And so what we are doing, and have done in fact, is taken all the data from these roughly 1,000 patients, also then gone through full genome scans, looked at metabolites, done a number of questionnaires, looked at their EMR data, and have developed algorithms that, from a blood test and from questionnaires and demographic information, identify these phenotypes. And we intend to launch our first product, which will be a product that is said to identify those people who respond to GLP-1 drugs early next year. And that'll be essentially a blood test.
Those four phenotypes, is it something where you either fall squarely into one of them, or is there crossover whereby you could be sort of 25% A and 3% D? Or
Yes, it's a great question. And what we learned from our founders is that COVID and everybody getting sequestered into their own homes exposed a lot more overlap. So you may be somebody who experienced, hungry brain, but being locked away, you may have a component of emotional eating, or you weren't getting enough exercise, so you have a component of slow burn. And so as we expand the number of tests that we will offer, we want to be able to really drill down and give people complete set of advice. So it may well be that you need a GLP-1 drug, but you also need some kind of exercise routine that is specifically targeted to slow burn. So, as this goes forward and we get more data and we understand more about how the disease evolves and more about how these phenotypes overlap, we intend to be able to not only just identify these particular categories, but also have a point of view on how interventions should work. So move from being a testing company to a testing company and a disease management company. It's such a complex disease. It evolves over time. We know there's heterogeneity amongst, individuals. There's differences amongst races. There's differences as one ages. We expect to learn, a lot as we work with patients, work with our physicians, get experience, and therefore be able to fine tune interventions for patients on a very, very precise way.
yeah, you mentioned how complex it is, and I guess from what you're saying, it's clear there's no one size fits all option. When it comes to working with physicians and coming up with individual treatment options, will all of the current treatments out there be sufficient given those differences between individuals?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's 10 or 11 drugs in development right now. We know there are different surgical techniques continue to be developed. Device companies continue to refine their products. I think we'll see. But my sense is, and as we talked about earlier, we're at the tip, really at the tip of the development of robust obesity treatments. It was interesting. I think Evercore and JP Morgan put out reports on the state of obesity medicine and therapeutics. And, they were suggesting that the market for obesity drugs would go from what was about $500 million 5 years ago to 50 billion by the end of the decade. So clearly something is happening. Clearly we are getting more refined, and clearly we're beginning to see, a large amount of investment in this field. I think as we look at it from a phenomics point of view, if we look at the disease from the phenomics point of view, we see complexity, but we do see, a way of managing the complexity, which is by starting with these phenotypes. But I think, if you think about cancer, we thought years ago cancer was cancer, and then it became, well, there's breast cancer and there's, stomach cancer, and now we talk, it's A sharp positive, HER2 negative. We talk about it in a much more refined fashion, and I think that's how obesity is gonna end up. We're gonna move from the beginnings of precision, which is what we are, precision medicine. In fact, nobody else really is at precision medicine. But we're going to move from that, and we're going to become more and more refined. And our job at Phenomix is to be on the forefront and push that so that we can really tailor these interventions to individuals.
I guess the more treatments there are and the more understanding of the different phenotypes in conjunction with treatments and your biobank registry, I guess that the further you go, the more refined that will become.
Yes, and thanks for bringing up the biobank registry. That's exactly why we want to start a registry. Very important for us to take a broad look at patients, not just in their current status, but over time. So look at longitudinal data. So the registry that we announced with Mayo Clinic will allow us to review and participate in the treatment of 2,000 patients over 5 years. We will help in that process, in that registry process, by applying custom tools that we've developed, an app and online questionnaires, so that we can interact with patients as they go through their treatments, understand where they were at baseline, understand whether or not the treatments and the interventions that have been suggested alter any behaviors, how their weight changes, how their activity changes, and then monitor what their baseline blood samples were, look at their genetic profile, but also metabolomic profile, hormones, etc. We want to have a full picture of these patients as they go through their treatment journeys. It's really interesting because we announced this with Mayo Clinic, and we're already in discussions with another large institution that wants to do the same thing with us. So there's a lot of interest in really delving into this idea that we can develop modalities for precision medicine in this field.
I guess it's also interesting because with something like a cancer, I mean, obviously there's remission, but you can kind of cure a cancer, or other conditions you can cure them. But with obesity, it's not quite that simple, is it? Because if you get somebody to an ideal body weight, it's not a case of saying, well, okay, you're done now. Well, because there's maintenance and there's a psychological aspect. So there's still a lot of work to be done, I guess.
And I think that's exactly where, we've slipped in the past, where the one size fits all. And whether it's a consumer-based program or a medical-based program, we've tended to go with a one size fits all. So now, if that ceases to work for you, there's a tendency then to go back and blame the patient. Well, you weren't really adhering to that program. You really weren't focused on it well. Well, actually, it could be that your phenotype moved or shifted or changed. And now it's time for us to go back and re-phenotype you and see whether or not as you said, there may be because you're in a job where you don't get as much physical activity, or maybe there's, some emotional component that stress that is causing it, and we need to change treatment. We need to move through that treatment. And so part of the reason we see our company as not only being a testing company, but a company that participates in the management of disease, because as we gain these insights, we'd like to be able to apply them. This is a challenge in chronic disease.
So what are the next steps for your company from here?
As I said, we are launching our first product. Once we do that, we hope to then go out and raise Series A financing. With that, we will do more R&D. We will conduct additional clinical studies. One of the big things is to get reimbursement so that we can sell the product more broadly. Our initial product will be sold as a direct cash pay product. Sadly, in obesity, much of obesity now is cash pay. We have had some very interesting early discussions with pharmaceutical companies. Obviously, the one size fits all does not fit all motto that both we and our founders use to describe why we're in business has been picked up by others. And we think that working with pharma companies to help develop products that are targeted will be a big help and advance in the field. Similarly, we've had some discussions with insurance companies. Obviously, their take is as these new drugs come out, that obesity drugs have come from $100 a month to $1,500 a month. They really like to know whether, if you're paying $1,500 a month for a drug, whether or not it works. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to work with others in the ecosystem. And we think that as a small company working with the right partners, we'll be able to have a much bigger impact. Our job, our mission is to kind of bend the curve. If we're successful, by 2030, we won't be at 50% obesity rate. We'll have bent that curve back down again. And so our job is to find the right people to work with to make that happen.
And now we head across to JLL to see what Travis McCready has for us this week. Hi, Travis.
Hi, Jim. One of the most persistent questions I get in life sciences, real estate, and economic development is the simple question, where? Venture capitalists and LPs want to know where they should invest and find companies for their portfolios, or where they can build teams that will efficaciously bring a particular technology to market. Institutional capital holders want to know which geographies they invest capital in to build lab infrastructure, or where there's the greatest supply-demand imbalance between life sciences company creation and the need for space. Life sciences companies want to know where the talent is located, or where they will have the best chance of finding and hiring the critical human resource that is the rate-limiting factor for any R&D company's growth. So much of today's entire life sciences enterprise turns on making smart decisions about location and place, much like in the American West during the 1800s, decisions about place and where to dig shaped fortunes during the fabled American gold rush. As such, entire conferences are often dedicated to this concept of life sciences innovation geography, as was largely the case with last week's annual meeting of the International Association of University Research Parks. And many a consultant's fee can sometimes be dedicated to sussing out successful life sciences clusters from unsuccessful clusters. We have come to understand that place not only correlates with life sciences activity, it can actually drive it forward. Take, for example, central nervous system research and development. Given the academic, research institute, and medical center assets in the area, it is no surprise that two of the biggest announcements about combating ALS were made this week by Boston-based companies. Biogen Eisai's phase 3 positive data on ALS and the amyloid approach, and the FDA's approval of Amylyx Pharma's Relivrio. Understanding place, one starts to decipher the growth of cell and gene therapy research in Philadelphia, recent floods of investments in Boulder, Colorado, and many other activities across the country. It isn't in that vein, then, that with great fanfare, my firm JLL yesterday released its annual Life Sciences Research Outlook and Cluster Rankings. Each year, our research team continues to reimagine and evolve the report, and this year we provide a dynamic view that highlights where U.S. markets stack up in relation to one another in terms of both human and physical capital. Given the general unsettled nature of the public markets, we not only considered static variables like available commercial real estate, we delved deeply into the resiliency of life sciences markets over time, as well as their efficiency in the use of research funding towards commercial activities. We wrap this all with a custom tool where companies can now weigh the big three variables, talent, real estate, and funding, in order to postulate, if the variables change, how a cluster's ranking changes. When considering place, there can sometimes be a tendency to talk about whether some place is better than another, and we hope our research outlook is a step towards avoiding that pitfall. Indeed, one of the most important advancements in life sciences research and development is the democratization and spread of the tools necessary to create successful companies. As the head of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration once quipped, "In God we trust. Everyone else, bring good data." Our 2022 Outlook, now available at JLL.com, will help users get a sense to where the many pockets producing those great data are located. So, as a community, we can continue to make breakthrough discoveries that ultimately wind up in the hands of patients. Thanks, Jim, and see you next week.
Okay, thanks a lot, Travis. Hope you have a great weekend. I think this weekend I will be trying to recover, as well as downloading dozens of videos. Travis McCready is the leader of JLL's Life Science Markets Advisory practice in the Americas, working closely with the global and scaling life sciences companies, developers and investors to achieve breakthroughs. He has more than 25 years of experience spearheading successful ventures related to technology and innovation, including as president and CEO of a $1.6 billion life sciences funding agency. And that's it. I must run because I have a plane to catch. Well, maybe walk, not run. And a whole lot of stuff to catch up on, mostly video editing and hundreds of emails to go through, and a need to defy the laws of physics by cramming more volume into my suitcase than it can actually hold. And just a quick reminder that this week's podcast was brought to you by LabForward. Many laboratories still utilize a manual approach when it comes to cold storage monitoring. If you're interested in how your laboratory can streamline this process with digital solutions, why not attend the free LabForward webinar on the 12th and the 18th of October? You'll learn what's needed for an effective cold storage monitoring program and how to bring your workflows to the next level. Register on the LabForward website at www.labforward.io/webinars. Hope to see you there. So I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast and that wherever in the world you are, you have a great week ahead and you'll join us next time for another Beyond Biotech.